order to more completely understand this gospel parable of Jesus, we need to know a few things about marriage customs at the time of Jesus, which are considerably different from our own. In Jesus' time, marriages were held at the home of the groom, and they were always held at night. And the bride would gather in her house with her 10 virgins or bridesmaids, similar to what a girl does today in getting married. But when everything was ready for the wedding to begin, the bridegroom would go with his entourage to the house of the bride, where he would formally greet her and then lead the procession back to his house. And of course, this was at night, and they didn't have street lights back then, so they all had to have their lamps lit. And the 10 girls would have provided sufficient light with their lamps, but 5 of them did not bring flasks of oil along. And maybe they figured their oil in the lamp would be enough, just, if the groom showed up when they were expecting. But the groom was delayed, and so they didn't provide that extra oil they were going to need, that the wise virgins did. And so when the groom was delayed and they lit their lamps, they realized they were going out, they didn't have enough oil, and that's why they asked the others to share them, but the others said wisely, no, there may not be enough for both of us. Go out and buy them. And of course that would mean waking up a merchant at midnight, and even if you can find someone who's willing to open up his store and sell the oil to them, well, when they went to do that, by the time they got back, the procession had already reached the house of the groom, and the door was barred. And they banged on the door saying, Lord, Lord, open for us. But what does the groom say? He says, Amen, I say to you, I do not know you. Now, he knew who these women were. He didn't think they were strangers. He obviously was offended by the fact that these girls could not carry out the simple requirement that was asked of them, to be ready and support the bride in what she had to do. It would kind of be akin to today if you had a bridesmaid that shows up at the bride's house beforehand and she's not wearing the dress that the bride had chosen. She goes, oh, I didn't like the way that one looked on me, so I picked something else out of my closet. Well, I think she'd be very offended by that. And the wedding still goes on, but of course, now she'd have a problem. She'd have to mix and match, groomsmen to bridesmaids and everything. And it shows great disrespect for the bride and the groom. And that's what these bridesmaids did, by not bringing oil. A simple thing that was required of them, to be ready and to make sure you take legitimate actions, to make sure you're ready to do your job, was all that was required of them, and they failed to do it. And of course, because of that, then they were not allowed to enter into the wedding feast. And wedding feasts lasted for days, and they were the social event of the year. You ate the finest foods and the choice of wines at wedding feasts. And Jesus uses all of this to refer to the kingdom of heaven, that you and I have all received an invitation to heaven the day that we were baptized. And we frequently speak of heaven as the eschatological banquet of heaven, the wedding banquet of heaven. We've often used that image because you eat the best foods and the best wines at a wedding. And so it's a place that people would want to be. And we want to be in heaven. There's no question about that. But while the Lord worked our salvation, we have to carry out our end of the bargain. We have to do what's required of us. It's not a guarantee that just because we were baptized, we will enter heaven. The Lord made it possible for us by his suffering, death, and resurrection, won back what we had lost through original sin. But now we have to follow him. We have to obey his teachings, worship him faithfully, all the things the Lord teaches us through the church that we need to do. And it's not overbearing. It's simple things, just loving the Lord and putting him ahead of everything else. And just living our lives each and every day following the Lord. And if we can do that, we will be found ready to enter the Lord's kingdom. But it's not a guarantee. Sometimes you hear people talking about, well, if I'm going to die, I'll just, if I know I'm going to die, I'll just go to confession beforehand, and I'll continue living a sinful life, whatever, and then I'll go to confession and I'll be ready. Well, it doesn't always work that way. Some people maybe have the ability to know that maybe they're dying of an illness, and they have, the doctors told them maybe it's only months to live or something like that. Others who may be advanced in years know they don't have 20 more years on this earth, and so their time left is short. But how many young people die very unexpectedly? They wake up one morning perfectly healthy, going off to work or whatever they do, and end up in an accident or something and die quite unexpectedly. And Would they have to turn to the Lord when they stand before him in judgment and say, well, Lord, if you'd only told me I was going to die today, I would have done things differently? Well, that's what the Lord is telling us to do. He says, stay awake. You know not the day nor the hour. Whether it's the time we die or if Jesus should return in glory while we are still alive, we don't always know when that's going to be. And so if we live a life faithfully following the Lord at each and every moment, we will have nothing to worry about. This past week, we celebrated the feast of St. Charles Borromeo, the Bishop and Cardinal of Milan. And he was one of the towering figures of the Catholic Counter-Reformation of the 16th century. And the story is told that he and a couple of priests were sitting around playing a game of cards one night. And this very topic came up as, what would you do if you found out you were dying today or Jesus was returning in glory? And they all said things such as, well, I'd go to confession. Well, I would make sure that, if I had any grudges with anyone, I'd straighten them all out beforehand. And the Holy Bishop said, I'd just keep playing cards. And how beautiful. Not because he was being cocky or assured of his salvation, but because he knew he was living each and every day as Jesus wanted him to live. And he had nothing to worry about. And he did not live in fear. And so, the first thing for us to remember is to relax. Jesus is trying to get us into heaven. The whole purpose of his death and resurrection was that we could all join him in his kingdom, where he longs that all of us be. He made that possible, but you and I have to follow him. He can't force us to do the things we need to do in order to follow him. He can't play with our free will, because it is precisely our free will that needs to be perfected. That you and I, of our free will, must say, no, Lord, I will reject all the sins that the world tells me to commit. I will reject all the things the world is telling me is right and that I should follow. And instead, I will listen to you, and I will follow your teachings, because you alone are the way and the truth and the life. And if we do that, then we have nothing to fear, just as the bishop knew he was doing. And not only will we discover that we have nothing to fear, as if we somehow think God is out there going to try to catch us, that we've been living a good life and he's going to come back and we're doing something wrong and say, aha, I caught you. Well, that's not what the Lord is trying to do. But in following him each and every day, well, we know such a peace that only comes from Christ. A joy of the order, of things being the way they're supposed to be. Because Christ fills us with a peace that the world cannot give, that only he can give. And by living our life faithfully following him each and every day, we will find his presence at difficult days to make them easier to bear, and his presence at the joyful times to make them 100 times greater. We will not fret as much as other people who have no hope. When things don't go the way we want them to go, we'll be able to say, well, you know what? Jesus is still Lord, and he will have the final word. And if I remain faithful to him, I will ultimately have the triumph with him as well. And so today the Lord challenges us to be alert, to remember to live each and every day faithfully following the Lord, so that if we should die in a moment we're not expecting, or the Lord returns in glory at a time we don't plan, and he tells us nobody knows that day, we won't be caught off guard saying, well, Lord, if you just told me that you were coming, I would have gone to confession, I would have done something differently. But just live our life each and every day following the Lord. So how do we know if we're doing that? Well, a couple of things that maybe can be a very big help to us in knowing whether or not what we're doing each and every day is pleasing to the Lord. Imagine you're in your living room watching TV, and Jesus should walk into the room. Would you say to him, oh Lord, come and sit down on the couch and watch this program, it's really funny? Or would you feel the need to take the remote and change it right away, that you'd be embarrassed to be caught watching that program? Or you're looking at the internet, and Jesus were to come in. Would you say, hey, look at this, Jesus, I'm checking up on this? Or would you want to slam your laptop closed very quickly so Jesus didn't see it? If you're having a conversation with people and Jesus were to join us, would we continue the conversation, or would we have to say, whoops, wait, Jesus is here. I better clean up my language or stop gossiping about that person because I know it's wrong. Or the things we might be doing when we're hanging out with friends, the different entertainments that we may have. Would we welcome Jesus into that, or would we feel embarrassed? That's a good way for us to look into our hearts and try to find out whether or not we're living our lives following Jesus every day. So at any moment, if you're in doubt, just stop and say, if Jesus walked into my life right now, would I continue doing what I'm doing, or would I feel the need to change immediately? And if we feel the need to change, then that should tell us we need to change. So the Lord challenges us today as we get into the end of our year, our liturgical year. 2 weeks from today, we celebrate the great solemnity of Christ the King, where we remember that Jesus will return in glory. The church tells us now at the end of the year, we're looking at the fact that we will all have our day of reckoning. We will all stand before the Lord and have to offer him the evidence of what we have done and receive our reward from him, good or bad. And we receive good reward if we have been faithful and followed him. And the Lord does not want us to fear. He wants to bring us into his kingdom. Just follow the Lord each and every day, doing what he tells us to do, and we will have nothing to fear when we stand before the Lord in judgment. May Jesus Christ be praised.